We'll begin with a reign of terror. A few murders here and there. Murders of great men, murders of little men, just to show we make no distinction.
For privacy reasons, I'm going to change all names and shift some ages around and relationships. Other than that, this story is completely and utterly true. I was adopted when I was 4 years old, and although my parents were, and still are to this day, caring, they had expectations of me as their child that I could not possibly reach. Because of this, they tended to verbally and emotionally abuse me. My one safe place in my new family, since they started fostering to adopt me, was my grandmother on my new mother's side. She, through her ethnicity and family, believed heavily in magic when it came to the mind and spirit. She taught me from the moment that I was adopted to read palms, tea leaves, tarot cards, and to meditate. She also taught me the importance of dreams and empathy. She always claimed that I was a strong empath. I knew things about people rather easily, things that could never just be figured out with reading body language. I never told anyone about these sessions or my strange gifts, mostly because I didn't realize that people found them interesting. I just assumed that it was a personality trait that people could have, at least until 4th grade, when I was 10 years old. I had gained some friends after transferring schools, and during a sleepover one night, I told my best friend Riley that her mother was going to have a baby. She had been worrying that her mother was pregnant again, and as she was one of the older of 6 kids, she knew the signs. But she never once discussed it with me. I wasn't even told that she had that many siblings. Sure enough, a week later, her mother announced that they were expecting child number 7. And Riley told everyone in our grade that I had some freakishly psychic powers, and suddenly everyone wanted me to predict their futures. Obviously, my gifts do not work like that. I'm not Phoebe from Charmed, where I can touch someone and just see their future. However, being a child that struggled a lot with neglect and emotional abuse, I thrived in the attention that it got me, and I started reading people's palms for fun. Around this time, my parents were frequently leaving me alone at home to go on vacations or to nice dinners, and they would leave me with a babysitter named Maggie when my grandmother was unable to look after me. Maggie was amazing and soon became a girl I could look up to. She was 18 years old and had a first cousin, Charlie, that was in the 7th grade at my school. Although her cousin was 3 years older than me, she rode my bus since she lived only about 5 blocks away. I wanted to like Charlie like I liked Maggie, but she tended to bully me on the bus and make fun of how I had hairy legs and didn't shave yet like she did. She also teased me for being so young and flat-chested, even though I was only 10 years old. Anyway, me revealing that I was a palm reader and such only gave her more ammunition to bully me with, and one day she sat uncomfortably close and egged me on to read her palm or to tell her future. She had been nagging me to do it for a while, so eventually I gave in, telling myself that this would be the perfect time to scare her and get even. When I read her palm, I had this idea in my mind of what I was going to tell her, that she was going to get hurt or that some ghost was haunting her. However, when I opened my mouth to say something of that sort, I suddenly blurted out something entirely different. You will die before you turn 18, and when you die, you will kill 2 people. Of course, she just burst out laughing, because who can kill someone when they die? Charlie obviously knew that I was just trying to freak her out. I shook it off, thinking nothing of the strange half-threat that I had blurted out, assuming that I just didn't think before I spoke. I could not have been more wrong. Fast forward to when I was a freshman in high school, and I completely forgot of that day. In fact, I'd nearly forgotten about my favorite babysitter, Maggie. She had moved away to college in a different state, and Charlie had gone to a different high school than I ended up going to. One night, when I was nearly 15 years old, my mother came into the living room, and she looked like she had been crying. During this time, my parents were getting divorced, so I assumed that she had been drinking, which was usually when she started crying. I stood up, ready to take the parenting role and put her to bed, but she had the house phone in her hand and said, "Honey, you need to sit down for this." She didn't slur her words at all. I immediately stiffened and lowered onto the couch, keeping on the edge, wondering immediately if something happened to Grandma or my father, who had moved out several months ago. She told me then that there had been a horrible car crash. 4 drunk girls got into a car and decided to have a joyride around some train tracks that were not too far from here. The train didn't hit them or anything, but there was a hill leading up to the tracks, and then to the left a ditch. Many cars had slid or tipped into that ditch if they drove too fast over the hill and tracks without turning their cars slightly to the right to avoid it. Apparently, they had taken to jumping the tracks by using the hill like a ramp with the radio blasting, but they ended up flipping down the ditch, and 3 of the 4 passengers died instantly. The 4th survived against all odds. The driver? Charlie, age 17, with her 18th birthday that next week. The survivor? My childhood babysitter, Maggie. Maggie ended up telling the story of what happened, since she was only a bit tipsy and soon came to remember that night just before the crash. Charlie had hit her head on one of the jumps and was feeling dizzy when they went to do another jump, so they decided to just go over the hill and continue towards the hospital, worrying that she had alcohol poisoning or a concussion. The last thing that Maggie remembers is Charlie starting to seize in the front seat, her foot hitting the gas hard towards the tracks. The rest was gone. She had possibly died before the car crashed, maybe even causing the crash, as if killing the 2 other girls in the car while dead. Since then, I have been very reluctant to use my abilities, as this is not the only death I have predicted. My husband's grandmother died a while back, and I was required to attend the funeral. There was no getting out of this one to prep the after dinner and basically avoid the whole not good with the dead people thing I have going on. I did not like my husband's grandmother. I respected her for what she did for my husband Jerry, and for the strength it took to raise 6 kids after her husband took off on her. But she was bigoted, prejudiced, and just plain mean in the way only an old lady could be. She also felt it was okay to hit my kids if she didn't like what they were doing or saying. I didn't then, and I don't now, ascribe to that school of thought. I could or would give a spanking if they did something dangerous, because a little pain versus a lot of pain or death was of course acceptable. Smacking my 6-year-old across the mouth hard enough to cut her lip because she dared to say no? Yeah, that was unacceptable to me, and I made very sure she knew that. And that to call people of color or diverse ethnic or religious backgrounds bigoted names would ensure she would not see my kids for weeks. Suffice to say, we did not get along while she was alive. We tolerate each other now that she's dead. Her death was fast, but not unexpected or sudden. We knew for a couple of weeks that she was going. The next part of this is hard to write, but please bear with me. While she was dying, and I mean that literally, in the last hours of her life, I stopped by to check on her house and grab a few things that my mother-in-law, who was by my mother's side at the hospital, needed. I was shocked to find that my aunt-in-law and her 2 daughters were at the house, going through her things. My mother-in-law lived there. It was and is her home, and Viola and her 2 girls were tearing through the house like it was a fire sale. They were grabbing stuff and putting it in large bags. My mother-in-law's coats, shoes, pictures off the wall, the computer I gave them for Christmas. I was completely shocked and said, "What the hell?" Vi said, "Oh, you need to get out of here. Mom hates you and I don't want you in my house." I replied, "I think this house belongs to Mary, not you. She's been paying the taxes and mortgage on it for 20 years. You need to put that stuff down and get out or I'm calling the cops. Mom said I could have anything I wanted, and my girls are helping me." Vi, Fern can't give you what isn't hers. Besides, she's been in a coma since before you got here. When could she have told you anything? Get out, or I'm calling the cops." They finally left after calling me a few choice names. I got the stuff Mary needed and went to drop it off at the hospital. I stayed by my hubby's side for the next few hours until Fern passed. They went back to Mary's house to find it completely ransacked, everything gone, including the antique 1890s front door. Since neither Vi nor her daughters showed up at the hospital, I knew exactly what had happened. They waited for me to leave and came back. When I said that and said what had happened earlier, they didn't really call me a liar, but they made their disbelief known. I just shrugged and went home. Vi showed up at our house that night, drunk as a skunk and screaming at my house. I didn't open the door or acknowledge her except to say, "Leave, or I'm calling the cops." Later I found out that she had showed up at the house and when confronted said that she hadn't done it, but her daughter April was there wearing one of Mary's sweaters, one that I got her for Mother's Day from a specialty boutique in Key West that was handmade and an original. When Mary recognized it, she called Vi on it, and they just took off and disappeared. They did show up at the service and left before anyone could speak to them. Jerry spent the 3 days before the funeral replacing the door and appliances and stuff they had stolen. Man, funerals bring out the worst in people, I guess. But back to the funeral. It was sparsely attended, which surprised me. Jerry's grandmother had been a member of the largest church in the area and had attended it for over 50 years. I expected at least a token showing from the church. I found out later that the church had made a mistake on the announcement card and put the next day's date on it, even though they were hosting the after-funeral lunch, and that was set up and prepared correctly. At the time, I did get a sense of her, but what I got was just older lady, tired, ready to sleep. Sad, a sadness linked to family. At least that was my perception. The funeral and after services went well, and Mary seemed to be coping. My children and husband were exhausted mentally and emotionally, so I suggested we go home for the afternoon and that we would come back later. I would make dinner for everyone and bring it with us. My husband forgot his wallet and had to go back in the house. My daughter was sitting next to me in the car, and I looked over to watch for my husband. And there, standing in the window, plain as day, was Fern, the woman we'd just seen buried. My daughter gasped, and not taking my eyes off the window where the white-haired woman stared back at us, I said, "You see her?" "Great-grandma's dead, but she's in the window," my daughter said. "I know, sweetie. She's probably just letting us know she's okay, or maybe she just wants to visit with her kids once more before she moves on." "Mom?" my daughter said. I consoled her. "It's okay, honey. Just wave like you used to, and then turn and talk to your brother. It'll be okay." My son Chris shrugged. "I don't see anything, but yeah, come look at my Pokemon Silver." My daughter did, and I watched Fern for a little while longer. She didn't really move, just stood there, like I'd seen her do 100 times before. Then, when my hubby walked out, she turned her head and looked at him as he strode towards us up the walkway, and then she disappeared. Let me explain about this window. It's north-facing, about 4 feet long and 3 feet tall. It has horizontal blinds that are always kept up, and heavy green drapes that are framed inside it. Fern always wore blue, black, or brown. Her hair was bright blue-white and haloed around her face in waves, and she was very clearly visible. 4 feet in front of the window from the outside is the television set, and nothing is allowed to be on top of that TV. Nothing. The glass is untinted, untreated, single-ply glass. It has a clear view in and out, and I could clearly see the family moving around behind the glass, including my husband. But just as clearly, I saw Fern standing there watching our car. She used to do it all the time when we left. It was like she was seeing us out and coming in. I didn't mention it to anyone at the time, but occasionally, over the years, I've seen her, standing and watching. I'm not sure why I thought I was the only one to see her, but I did think that, and I was wrong. Not too long ago, when I was dropping off some chicken and dumplings for Mary, one of the new neighbors came over and asked Mary, who was the woman in the window? He'd seen her this afternoon. Mary had been at the doctor's office, which is why I made her supper, and she was all up in arms about some strange woman in her house, and I went in and got Fern's picture and brought it to the new neighbor. I showed it to him and said, "Is this who you saw?" He recognized her immediately. I was at a loss to explain, but Mary said, "Oh, that's Mama. She normally doesn't stop by if I'm not here, but she visits to check on me all the time. You'll see her sometimes, don't worry about it." Mary didn't explain that the visitor was dead, and I didn't know how to explain that the window view wasn't quite what it seemed. On a side note, that doctor's visit was an appointment that led to the discovery of cerebral blockage in her brain. Mary's had 2 very dangerous surgeries since then to remove the blockages. I have to wonder if Fern was there because she knew something serious was happening and wanted to show her support and caring after all.